Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my November wrap-up. So this is gonna be all over the place because my reading month in November was all over the place, but as usual, we're just gonna start off with my stats and we are going to go from there. In the month of November, I read 8 books for a total of 3,877 pages. None of those so far have been DNF'd. So as far as genres go, I read 1 contemporary, 5 fantasy, and 2 sci-fi. My star ratings for this month were actually pretty good. Nothing, incredibly amazing or stellar for reasons that I have talked about in a previous vlog. We had personal stuff going on in November, so a lot of this was honestly just comfort reads for me. But I did have 7 4-star reads and 1 3-star read. Most of those 7, well, almost half. So like 3 out of those 7 were rereads. One of these was an e-book, 2 of them were e-arcs, 1 of them was a book that I read physically, and then 4 of them I read in multiple different ways. So either I read them physically, or I read them in an ebook, or I read them on audio. And then finally, 1 of these was an adult, 2 of them I counted as new adult, and 5 of them were young adult. Forgot that I had some hot cocoa over here, so I'm just gonna be drinking that while I talk to you. Okay. So the first book that I read was called Luminous by Mara Rutherford. I'm going to preface this with I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This was an arc that I had gotten off of NetGalley. I had read A Crown of Coral and Pearl, I think is the other book that she wrote, by the same author. I loved that book. It actually was the first arc that I had ever gotten off of NetGalley, and so it kind of has a special place in my heart because of that. But I was greatly surprised at how much I enjoyed it. Now, this one, I don't know how to describe it. I don't remember the main characters' names at all, but I can tell you that you follow a girl who has magic in a world where magic is greatly prejudiced against. If you have it, you are kind of like, I don't want to say kidnapped, but written down on a list and utilized for the good of the evil kingdom's, what is it? He's like the king's like right-hand man, kind of. I don't know. He finds people that use magic and he uses them for whatever he needs them to do. I guess he's an evil guy. So she's hiding her power, which as far as you can tell in the beginning is this, she glows. And one day things happen and eventually this evil man finds out about her, and there's this whole sequence of events that I gave this a 3 stars because I just didn't care. I didn't care about the characters. I didn't bring myself to care about the plot. I didn't care about the magic system, which was all over the place. You were either born with it or you weren't, and it was very X-Men-y in terms of what you could do. You were just kind of born with one specific ability, and this girl was kind of like a chosen one because, like, it's a whole thing. So yeah, the cover was beautiful. There was nothing actually wrong with it outside of the fact that it just seemed very basic in terms of writing style and plot and characters and everything, and I just didn't care. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I can see that it would be for some people, but it really just wasn't for me. The next book that I read was called Bell, Book, and Key. This is the, I believe, series finale, trilogy finale. It's the 3rd book in the Chronos Origins series by Risa Walker. I have talked about the Chronos Files and the Chronos Origins on my channel before. Specifically, I mentioned it in a video that I made last year. If you like this TV show, you might like this book. Maybe it was the other way around. You know what I mean. But it was for my recommendation for the TV show Timeless, because there is a lot of time travel. Risa Walker writes a lot about time travel. The first series, it might have been a trilogy, but the first one she wrote had to do with a girl who kind of experienced a timeline shift in which she was never really born, and the only reason that she was aware of this and continued to exist was because her grandmother has a device that saved her, because she was a member of a future organization that is full of historians that travel throughout time to gather firsthand knowledge of history. But certain historians were trapped in the past because one of their members went rogue, so things kind of go from there. Now, you follow her entire story as she tries to save the timeline and blah, 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 blah. But the second trilogy, which kind of features throwback characters from the first one, but is really its own thing, follows characters that kind of create the origin of Kronos, which is the time-traveling history organization. It's very wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. So they create Kronos in the future, but they are also dealing with Kronos as it exists in their time, because they created in the future, but the people from the future came to their time, so technically the technology is there, but it hasn't been created yet, if that makes any sense. And people are messing with the timeline. I can't really tell you much about the plots of this specific book because it's the third one, so it's the last one, and it wrapped up the events of the previous two, but I liked it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoy her writing for the most part. I like history, I like historical stuff. I don't necessarily love historical fiction all the time, but like I'm usually fairly interested in it if I'm watching it on TV or learning about it. And I know that Risa Walker does a lot of research to try and make it as historically accurate as possible. So I was very interested to see, because this specifically deals with a kind of game in which you change events in the past and see what the ripple effects are in the future, except somebody was bringing that game into real life. And while I liked the premise of that, and while I liked seeing like the consequences of maybe like seeing if you change one thing what happens, butterfly effect and whatnot, it got very confusing. The rules of the game were very confusing because it's a game that doesn't exist, and it's a concept that is really hard to wrap your head around, for like the fact that time travel doesn't exist. So keeping the events in a time period that I am not familiar with for 2 out of 3 of the books in this trilogy was just really difficult for me. But I still liked it. I love the characters, I love the relationships that were built, I loved seeing the throwback to the original trilogy, and I am very interested in reading more of what Risa Walker puts out. So 4 out of 5 stars for that one. The next book that I read in November was Aurora's End by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is the 3rd and final book in the Aurora cycle. Aurora cycle. This has been a long time coming. I read the first book, I think in January of 2020, or like early 2020. Second one came out in May of 2020, and this one took this long to come out, and the second one ended on a cliffhanger. For those of you who don't know, the second one ended on a massive cliffhanger, and it destroyed my soul. So we finally get to see the events of this. I can't really tell you what's going on. It will spoil literally everything. But if you haven't heard of the Aurora cycle, it follows a girl named Aurora who was supposed to go and join her parents on a colony, and instead her ship kind of got sidetracked and she got stuck in some kind of dark matter-y type of storm for like 300 years, and all of the other members on the ship died, and she was the only one who remained in cryostasis. And she was found by the illustrious leader of the first book, whose name is Tyler. He is the all-around, all-American, not really American because this is a very Star Trek-y kind of organization that they work for, but you get what I mean. Boy next door, good guy who had everything going for him. He was top of his class. He was going to select his team. He was going to handpick his team of people that he wanted on his crew to work with, and he couldn't sleep, and he kind of flew out for some practice before this big test type thing and kind of stumbled upon Aurora and her ship and rescued her. And that ends up with a ragtag team of misfits that nobody else wants because he was late. It's awesome. I mean, it's campy, it's very, well, it's young adult, and it has some kind of adultish humor, I will say, but nothing like outwardly super graphic that I would be that concerned about. I thought that it was a great time. I know that not everybody shares that opinion, but the humor, the storyline, the characters, everything is right up my alley, and this, while it is probably not as far up there as the Illuminate files are for me, I just loved so much about this. The characters are so great, the relationships that they build, the found family aspect, I love it so much. This is Finian. He's one of my favorites. He's precious. But yeah, this got a 4 out of 5 stars. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars just because there was a lot of repetitiveness, and if you know what I mean because you've read this, then you know what I mean. It was actually, I will say, the repetitiveness was my favorite part of the book. It was when we left that I immediately grew bored, and when we left that, it was to go and see characters that previously I was obsessed with. In their first book, their relationship, I was obsessed with them. In the second book, it got to be a little bit too much, and in this third book, it's still kind of just a lot for me. Like, I support it, it's fine, they're great together, but like, we got too much of it. I was kind of done. I really wanted more of the relationship that had developed at the end of book 2. Both of them, there were 2. That part delivered, and so I loved those scenes a lot, but when we moved to the other ones, it was just not as entertaining to me, I guess. But I really, really liked it. I thought that it was a great closeout to this trilogy, and I hope that they write more space stuff, because while I don't really like what Jay Kristoff seems to write on his own, I do love the books that he puts out when he writes with Amy Kaufman, and their space opera-y type things are just great. I just enjoy them. Okay, the next 3 books I'm just going to talk about all at once because, well, talking about them individually would get spoilery for the series, for 1, but 2, they are all part of the exact same series. So, The Exiled Queen, The Grey Wolf Throne, and The Crimson Crown. The last 3 books in the Seven Realms series, like I said, I read all of these because it was just like a comfort reread for me. I really needed to just go back to something familiar. And while there are a lot of pages between these 3 books, I blew through them because I love all of them so much. During this reread, I did end up giving them 4 stars. I'm honestly really regretting doing that. It's just, the series is so beloved to me that it's a 5-star no matter what. Even if I can, while I'm reading them individually, pick apart the things that make them not necessarily perfect in a 4-star sense, I just don't care. So they are 5 stars to me anyway, and I probably will be going back and changing that the more that I talk about it. Especially the last book. I love the way that this series wraps up so much. I've talked about it on my channel before. I am probably not going to beat this to death any longer. You guys know that I love these books, so yeah. They were the next 3 that I read last month. The next book that I read was an arc that I got off of NetGalley, and it was just such like a cute, fun time. And that is called So This Is Christmas by Tracy Andreen. It's like a contemporary young adult romance, and it was adorable. It gave me those Hallmark Christmassy feels. I loved it. Finley Brown is the female lead. I think it's first person point of view. And you follow Finley, who is a 16-year-old who left her town of Christmas, Oklahoma, to go to a boarding school because she's like really smart and gets really good grades, and she got a scholarship to get in, so she goes to a boarding school off in Connecticut, I think, something like that. And she finds that she is having a harder time fitting in there. She is struggling with the successful trope of the girl who did really, really well in high school, and as soon as she goes, or not girl, but any person, the trope in which any student does really, really well in school comes very easily to them in high school, and all of a sudden when they are moved to a more challenging situation, they start to flounder. And this is the case for her, where she is in a pool of people that are equally as successful as she was, and she is no longer at the top of the ladder. She actually finds herself towards the bottom, and it is hard for her to adjust. And so over Christmas, she decides to come back to her hometown, where she's going to work at her grandmother's inn over Christmas and try and reevaluate and see if she even wants to go back to this boarding school in the next term. When she gets home for Christmas, she almost immediately finds out that another student at her boarding school, along with his aunt, have actually checked into her grandmother's inn. And it turns out that when she had left for this boarding school, she had kind of decked out her town's website to be the pretty much perfect example of an idyllic Hallmark family Christmas town. She wanted it to impress all of her friends that she wasn't really making at this boarding school, and she kind of forgot to change it back. And so Arthur, seeing all of these pictures on the website, decides he's British, decides he wants to experience a true American Christmas with his aunt, and goes to this town only to be sorely disappointed because it is kind of like your Wish.com Hallmark Christmas town. And so yeah, hijinks ensue. It's a whole thing, and it was adorable, and if you like any of that, go check it out because it just came out like in October, I think, and it was adorable. And then finally, the last book that I read in the month of November was The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. John has been on me to read this for a while now because he fell in love with the series when he read this book, I want to say last year. I know he gave a review for it on my channel last year. He knew that I would love it because it's a lady scientist in a fantasy version of Victorian era England who would like to subvert expectations for her gender at that time and go study some dragons. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. This was really, really good. Not only was the entire storyline awesome, but honestly, the audiobook was really great. And the only thing that you miss out on by listening to it audibly instead of reading it physically is that she has drawn illustrations throughout the entire thing. This was such a fun read. I can't wait to move on in the series. I was devastated by a certain thing that happened that I will not talk about, but yeah, that's the only thing that hurts me moving forward in the series. But it was fine. It ended okay. And that is probably a large part of the reason why this came out to a 4-star for me instead of a full 5. But the author, Marie Brennan, for those of you that don't know, not only, I think she's an anthropology, yeah, she has a background in anthropology and archaeology, but in addition, which makes the science in this really, really cool. But in addition to that, she actually co-writes a book that I have talked about on my channel before called The Mask of Mirrors. It's written by M.A. Carrick, and she co-writes with, I want to say, Alex, I don't remember what the other author's last name is, but she is one of the co-writers for that book, and we all know that I loved The Mask of Mirrors earlier this year, so I knew that there was a very high chance I was going to enjoy her writing style going into this. And it was true. We do have the next few books in the series. I don't think we have all of them, but I would like to move on to it sometime next year, hopefully. But anyway, those are all of the books that I read in November. I started 4 more, so we can call them honorable mentions. I started 3. We'll call them honorable mentions. I started Beasts of Prey at the beginning of last month. I struggled with it really a lot because I was struggling with my reading really a lot. But I got the audiobook for it yesterday, so we are finally moving along with that. But I really didn't get very far into it, so I'm going to include it in my December wrap-up instead of my November one. And I also started The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan because my plan had been to read the book before the show came out. I failed. I failed miserably. See reasons that I mentioned before. I'm like 150 pages into that. I would like to read that and finish it this month, but like I said, I have to read something like, I've got to read something like 18 books this month if I want to hit my Goodreads goal. I don't think it's going to happen, especially because I am also currently reading Rhythm of War, so that's going to take up a large chunk of my time. But we will see. I've got a lot of graphic novels in my future and novellas, let me tell you that much. So those are my honorable mentions. I started both of those in November, and I have not yet finished them. I am also in the middle of The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart, which is the second book in, does it have a name? The Drowning Empire, which is the second book in the Drowning Empire series, the first of which was The Bone Shard Daughter, which I really, really loved earlier this year as well. So yeah, those are what I'm reading and in the middle of in my honorable mentions, but other than that, I guess that is it for my November wrap-up. Let me know in the comments if you guys have read any of these, if you have any books that you go to for comfort reads when you're feeling down or dealing with some stuff and you just don't want to think about anything. I know that I'm not the only one that does that. So I will link all of those in my description box down below. Down there you'll also find some affiliate links, such as my book of the month, and soon to be, if it's not there already, will be an Unplugged book box rep code for 5% off. In addition to that, if you want to follow me on Goodreads, Twitter, or Instagram, you can find my links to all of those. Other than that, that is it for me today, guys, so I will talk to you in my next video. Bye!